अमृत भी देवै सदा वंदिता सामान पत सरस्वती भगवती निशेष जय जय हे भगवती सुरभारती तव चरणों प्रणमामः जय जय हे भगवती सुरभारती तव चरणों प्रणमामः नाद ब्रह्ममयि जय भागेश्वरी नाद ब्रह्ममयि जय भागेश्वरी शरणं जय जय हे भगवती सुरभारती तव चरणों प्रणमामि शरण्या त्रिभुवन सुरमुनि वंदित चरणा नवरस मधुरा कविता मुखरा स्मित रुचि रुचिरा भरणा जय जय हे भगवती सुरभारती तव चरणों प्रणमामः तव चरणों प्रणमामः तव चरणों प्रणमामः. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Beautiful rendering.
Thank you, Rimi. Thank you so much.
Sir ne kuch bola. What did you say, sir?
It was a beautiful rendering.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
But
Thank
somebody
you.
has unmuted his or her mic. Which is
Sir,
causing a disturbance. I don't know. Somebody in between.
Yes, sir. Sir, there are so many participants. We are going to mute them all. Then kindly unmute yourself.
Right. Because that was causing a disturbance in the.
It's a great disturbance.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Suparna. I'll take your leave, and I'm looking forward to join very soon sometime.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Wonderful rendition. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure.
After this blissful beginning, on behalf of the Department of English, Government Girls PG College, Riva, I welcome our honored guest, Professor Chandra Dr Roy, Mrs. Rimi Basusena, our respected principal, Professor Neeta Singh, erudite guests from other colleges, universities, faculty members of our college, and all our wonderful participants to this one-day national webinar. However, before proceeding with the program,
it has to be unmuted.
1 minute. Yes. However, before proceeding with the program, we would like to offer a floral welcome to our chief guest. I request our principal, Professor Neeta Singh, to welcome both our guests with flowers.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a minute, ma'am.
Ma'am, this is a welcome with flowers by all of us. Then we come back and you will give your address, welcome address.
Okay. The, the day is very important day, International Women Day. Few lines for every house, every heart, every feeling, every moment of happiness is incomplete without you. Only you can complete this world. Happy Women's Day. Now come on the topic. Warmly welcome to respected chief guest, organizing committee, professors, my student, other respective person on the occasion of webinar organized by Government Girls PG College Riva and is sponsored by MPHEQIP. Literature and life are the two sides of the same coin. Literature does not only reflect society, but it's also a guide, mentor, friend, companion for us throughout our life. Oscar Wilde said, I regard the theatre as the greatest of all art forms, the most immediate way in which a human being can share with another the sense of what, which is human being can share with another the sense of what is to be a human being. I congratulate the convener, Dr. Anita Kosar, and the organizing secretary, Dr. Suparna Banerjee, Department of English, for having chosen such an interesting topic for a webinar. A subject which is close to the heart of every human being, irrespective of his or her inclination in life. I am very happy that such an eminent personality is Professor Chandra Dr Roy from the Department of English and Modern European Language, University of Allahabad, has graciously agreed to enlighten us upon the subject of contemporary and experimental theatre in India. I am delighted to have Mrs. Rimi Basu Sinha in our midst from Mumbai. Her rendition of Saraswati Bandna has added melody and graces to the session. It promised to be a delightful session, and I once again extended a warm welcome and greetings to Professor Sanjay Datta Rai, Mrs. Rimi Basu Sinha, our estimated guest, and all the participants who have enriched this session with their presence. I take this opportunity to congratulate all the faculty members of the Department of English Government Girls PG College Riva for their venture and wishes them all success. Thank you. Once again, most welcome of the Sanjay Datta Roy. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Now I will call upon the convener of the session to greet our speaker, chief guest with flowers.
We welcome you, sir.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Shall I start?
I will request our convener to greet our principal with flowers.
We welcome you, ma'am, to our webinar virtually.
I will request Dr. Anita Kaushal to greet Mrs. Rimi Basu Sinha with flowers.
Welcome you, Rimi, once again.
Now to carry the proceedings further, they say that they say that Kalidas and Bhas were the torchbearers of our journey towards civilization. Our cultural evolution has passed through several stages over epochs. There's a lot of disturbance. They say that Kalidas and Bhas were the torchbearers of our journey towards civilization. Our cultural evolution has passed through several stages over epochs. Drama, being the oldest among representative art forms, has been through a variety of corridors, representing human life, characters, psyche, social and political intrigues, religious concepts, and above all, the vision of the playwright. It is my proud privilege to introduce my revered teacher, Professor Chandra Dr Roy, from the Department of English and Modern European Languages, University of Allahabad, who is a doyen of theatre in his own right and has graciously accepted our request to give us an interesting insight into contemporary and experimental theatre in India. I now hand over the mic to our convener, Dr. Anita Kaushal, to carry forward proceedings of this webinar.
Thank you, Sruparnadi. I welcome you all in this webinar organized by the English department. And I also wish a happy Women's Day to all the lovely ladies here. Before I start, let me introduce you with Rimi Basu Sinha, who had just rendered a beautiful and melodious Saraswati Vandana for us. Rimi Basu Sinha is an accomplished music personality based in Mumbai. She is working as a singer, composer, and voice trainer. She has acquired master's degree in Hindustani vocals from Allahabad University, along with Sangeet Prabhakar from Prayag Sangeet Samiti. Apart from being a top graded artist in All India Radio and television, she has many coveted albums released from prestigious music companies. She has also had the opportunity of working in Nairobi, Kenya as a mentor, singer, and a radio jockey. She had the honor of staging programs on behalf of Indian High Commission and represented India in different cultural fora. She worked on a couple of international albums as well. Known for her expertise in voice culturing, she teaches innovative techniques to develop one's voice. Alongside traditional style of training, she imparts modern day techniques too. Rimi has had the privilege of dubbing almost all the leading artists. Some of her famous works are the albums like Sakhi Celebrating Womanhood with Sunidhi Chauhan, K.S. Chitra, Kavita Krishnamurti, Usha Mageshkar, Richa Sharma, and Mahalakshmi Iyer. Also the other albums like Maiya Ka Darbar with Kumar Sanu, Krishna Krishna, Jane Hamari Bindiya, and Man Bawara. So it is nice to have Rimi here on such a nice occasion. I thank you once again for a wonderful rendition. And now let us come to the topic of today's webinar. So before I invite our reverend speaker, I would like to give you a brief history of Indian theatre. We all know that theater is a living, breathing, collaborative art form. Our theater started with the Sanskrit drama ages ago. It is said about Kalidas and Bhas, as Madam has said right now, that these were the torchbearers of our journey on the road to civilization. Despite Bharat Muni's clear concept of stagecraft, our ancient Sanskrit theater inevitably went through its phase of decadence. All the foreign invasions in the country, political turmoil, and changing condition in every sphere of life must have been responsible for the end of the royal patronage. During these difficult times, I think it was the common men who preserved the theater, sometimes without knowing he was doing it, through rituals, by praying God, or merely for entertainment or for both. Sometimes with social or political purpose. We had the Yakshagan in Karnataka, the Ram Leela in the north, the Jatra in Bengal, Krishnattam in Kerala, and the Tamasha in Maharashtra. East India Company first pitched its camp in Calcutta about 300 years ago. This was the first time the British set foot on Indian soil, bringing with them the technique of staging entertainment as they knew it. They used mammoth sets and gorgeous costumes, especially in historical places. The Parsi theater had music, dance, and drama in large measure. Both the acting and the delivery of dialogue were very theatrical. We know that an opera-style performance staged by a Parsi company in Pune more than 100 years ago partly influenced the pioneering Marathi dramatist Anna Sahib Kirloskar. The Marathi version of opera had, of course, its own distinct stamp. We can recognize this in plays like Kirloskar's Saubhadra or Khandelkar's Man Apman, or the stage contribution of Bal Gandharv, Keshav Rao Bhosle, Master Dinanath, and many others. Our Malayalam and Kannada theatres had a strong mythological base too, like mainstream theatre everywhere. But there were a few attempts to introduce some social content. As the Gandharv era of musicals started fading in Maharashtra, pioneering experimental attempts were made by intellectuals influenced by Ibsen and Shaw. Even before independence, Indian theatre was fighting a losing battle with the talkie film. Theatres were transformed into cinemas, and the audiences forget their exclusive loyalty to drama. But we also had giants like Prithvi Raj Kapoor, who poured their earnings from films into purposeful theatre. The contribution made by the Indian People Theatre Association during this period was highly significant. In the early 40s, young actor-director called Shambhu Mitra literally turned the orthodox Bengali theatre upside down with his production of Bijon Bhattacharya's Lavanno. In the decade after independence, both mainstream and experimental directors contributed to the revival of theatre in Bombay. Adi Marzban, the comic genius of the Gujarati Parsi theatre, Ibrahim Al-Qazi with his theatre unit, Atmaram Bhende with the INT, Bhalba Kelkar with the PTA, these elders laid the foundation for the future development in the urban theatre in Gujarati, Marathi, English, and Hindi in this region. More than a decade after independence, a strong leftist movement swept over Bengal and Kerala. Theatre became a powerful instrument of influencing mass opinion all over the country. Wherever there was political motivation for it, it became a weapon of political means, especially to reach out the people who could not read and write. The National School of Drama in New Delhi received a new lease of life in the year 1962 when Ibrahim El-Qazi took over its director. He believes that, I quote, "Theatre man is the interpreter of his times. He is the conscience of his race. What kind of awareness and insights does he bring to the problems of his days? What kind of understanding does he bring and to the interpretation of a text that it becomes relevant and meaningful to his contemporary audience? That is the basic problem of a theater. He brought revolutionary changes in theater. Just then, unprecedented movement for exchange in our regional theater started. The late Mohan Rakesh in Hindi, Girish Karnad in Kannad, Vijay Tendulkar in Marathi, and Badal Sarkar in Bengali all contributed in various measures to this confluence of regional theatre. We now truly had and have a national theatre. The work of these great playwrights was match the imagination and effort put in by several young directors of this period. Actor directors like Vijaya Mehta, Arvind Deshpande, Om Shivpuri, Shyamanand Jalan, Satyadev Dubey, and many others put across their plays with unusual sincerity and dedication. Music became an integral part of theatre. It is like interpretative part of speech. Habib Tanvir's Charandas Chor is in a class of its own. His Chhattisgarhi tribal artists convey the message with an unusual sense of music, drama, and humor. He tried to present the strong culture in its indigenous form. Vijay Tendulkar's Ghashiram Kotwal also absorbed folk forms in a very intelligent way. As a result, Tendulkar succeeded in creating a new form altogether. This total theatre is at its best. We also have an active English language theatre, which is trying hard to come to terms with indigenous theatre through the works of the people like Pearl Padamsi, Vimal Bhagat, Berry John, and Sylvester Dicuna. Among its series-minded attempts to give the best to the world theatre is a production of Beckett's Waiting for Godot. New serious theatre artists like Arun Mukherjee, Prasanna, Amol Palekar, Shekhar Chatterjee, Bansi Kaul, Kanhaiya Lal, and many others have experimented in form and content both. Badal Sarkar said, "Theatre is a live show. Direct man-to-man communication occurs in theatre. Theatre is here now, two parties of human being, the performers and the spectators. They come to the same place on the same day at the same time, and something happens between them. Therefore, theatre is a human action. In our theatre, content is the primary and important point. We explore for the form which is more suited to convey, to project our content more effectively and most intensely. And then the Proscenium Theater in 1972-73 came into being, and which got popularity. Today, it is our proud privilege to have an eminent personality of international fame in the field of theatre with us. So now let me introduce you to our honorable keynote speaker today. Professor Chandra Dr Roy is in the Department of English and Modern European Languages, University of Allahabad. In 1995-96, he was a senior Fulbright Fellow at Louisiana State University, Baton Rouge, USA, and in 2004, he was a Fulbright visiting professor teaching a course on Narratives in India, Poetic, Fictive, Performative at University of California, Berkeley, the USA. His papers on poetry and theater have been published in several journals in India and the USA. Prominently, he has published papers in Yeats Eliot Review, Arkansas, and the Journal of Modern Literature, Temple University, Philadelphia. He has delivered talks on theater and literature at JNU, Jadavpur University, Pace University, Tufts University, State University of New York at Stony Brook, which is commonly called Stony Brook University. Recently, that is in 2016 and 2019, he was invited to speak on theater in India at the University of Connecticut, Stores, and at the University of California, Berkeley. He has his own theater group called Theater for Peace, comprising of students, faculty, and alumni of the University of Allahabad. And over these past 2 decades, they have performed Havadan by Garnet, Dakhar by Tagore, Autobiography or Atmakatha by Mahesh L. Kunchwar, Asar Ka Ek Din by Mohan Rakesh, Mahesh Dattani's Tara, Arun Mukherjee's Marich, The Legend, and Badal Sarkar's Evam Indrajit, among many other plays. At present, he is the coordinator of the Center for Film and Theatre, University of Allahabad. So it is definitely a great honor for us to have such an eminent speaker with us. So now I request Professor Chandra Dr Roy, sir, over to you now. The platform is yours. Sir.
Thank you for such a wonderful introduction, and thank you for welcoming me to speak here. It is a privilege and a pleasure both for me, right?
Thank you, sir. Welcome, sir, once again.
And of course, you see, Suparna has been my student as well in the University of Allahabad. So that is one connection that is there, right? Now, what I plan to do today is to share with you a kind of narrative that has evolved over the years in my understanding of theater, where I will try to cover certain plays and certain playwrights who I feel have kind of expressed what the contemporary and what the experimental is in Indian theater. Of course, you see, I'll be touching on some. Maybe I will not be touching on other playwrights and other plays. They can also be contributing to it. But as I told you, it is a personal narrative where certain things became more important to me over the years. So I'll be sharing that with you. Of course, you see, there was a very comprehensive introduction which was given right now, which touched on a lot of the aspects of theater. And it is good that such an introduction was there, because I will be perhaps developing on some of the things which were mentioned here, right? I plan to begin with our great Indian performative text, the Natya Shastra, right? And from the Natya Shastra, I plan to move via the Natya Shastra through what has been called the classical theater, the Sanskrit theater, you see, which was there, you see, where I will plan to take up a play by Girish Karnad. All of you must have either seen the film or read the play. It's called Agni Varsha. It has been translated as Fire and the Rain into English by Karnad himself, right? So from the Natya Shastra, I shall move into several aspects of Indian theater, several dimensions of Indian theater, which will cover folk theater, which will cover street theater, which will cover existential theatre, which will cover political theatre, which will cover what is called the memory play or the autobiographical theatre or biographical theatre. And then I will also try to cover some of the experiments done by some women playwrights with what is called the play within the play format. I am not mentioning the playwrights and the plays right now. I will be mentioning them as my narrative moves. So let me begin with the Natya Shastra. My way of looking at the Natya Shastra here will be a little different. I am not planning to look at the intricacies of what the Natya Shastra categorically says about actors, characters, acting and all that. That has been studied a lot. What I plan to talk about is the essential structure and the conception of the Natya Shastra, which is still, to my mind, extremely relevant for contemporary Indian theatre. The Natya Shastra, as all of you are well aware, was created as the fifth Ved, the Natya Ved, which is after the four Veds were created. It was felt, the necessity was felt. You see, because the moral fiber of society was degenerating at that time. And it was felt that Vedic knowledge of the Veds and the Purans had become exclusive property of the upper caste people. And that knowledge needed to filter down, to percolate down from the upper caste Brahmins and their knowledge of the Sanskrit texts, the Veds, the Purans, down to the lowest level of people, the lower castes, the tribals. And in that structure, what they called the demons, right? From the Devs, the upper caste, to the lowest strata of society. And for this purpose, it was decided by the gods that the Natya Ved should be created, which will be the medium through which this knowledge shall go down, percolate down to the lowest level, to the folk, to the common man, to the ordinary people. And it was decided that this Natya Ved, or the fifth Ved, would be practiced not by the Devs who were living at a very high level, you see, but by a human medium. And there they decided on Bharat Muni and his sons as the first troupe of performers who would do what was required with the creation of the first theatre. And that is where you see that initial theatre of India was created, you see, by Bharat Muni and his sons. And as it was decided that stories from the Veds and the Purans would become the subject matter for these plays which were to be done by Bharat Muni and his sons. And the first story that was chosen in the banner ceremony was the story of Indra, Vritta, and Indra and his two brothers, the human brother and the demon brother, and how Indra actually dominates and sort of destroys the demon brother and the human brother and becomes powerful, you see. Now, this particular play, which was formulated, was supposed to be done in the banner ceremony. Now, this is where an important thing happens. Now, the Natya Ved, or the fifth Ved, was created so that, you see, it could filter down to the lowest level. And yet, when the first performance was done of this particular story of Indra, the demons, the lowest strata, were kept out. They were not even invited for the show. Now this was not what was originally planned in the fifth wave or the Natya wave. Because the Natya wave was supposed to reach out to these people. And therefore, you see, it is been recorded in the first chapter of the Natya Shastra that the first performance by Bharat Muni and his sons was disturbed, was disrupted by the audience. And who were the ones who disrupted and disturbed this performance? They were these same demons who were kept out of the show. Now the demons also had powers. Now they did not use those powers in a violent manner against Bharat Muni and his sons. They used that power in a very subtle manner. And what was the subtle way? They made the actors forget their parts, forget their movements, and that created chaos in the performance. And therefore, the first performance done by Bharat Muni and his sons, which is recorded in the first chapter of the Natya Shastra, was a failure. It was a failure because the purpose of the Natya Ved was not taken care of. The demons had been kept out, and the demons disrupted that show because they were excluded from the performance, from the show. Right? Now, what happens is, you see, in the last chapter of the Natya Shastra, and this is not there in all the editions of the Natya Shastra. This was later included in the later editions of the Natya Shastra. There is a second disturbance that happens in Indian theatre, in the classical Indian theatre, but this disturbance is a different kind of disturbance. Now, I will try to share with you what this different disturbance was. Now, remember, Bharat Muni and his sons were upper caste Brahmins. They were upper caste people. And when they started doing the plays, which were stories from the Ved and the Puran, in those stories, you see, there were characters who were demons and characters who belonged to the lower caste and other castes. But they were looked at as villains in those stories. Only the upper caste and the gods were considered as heroes in those stories. Now, when the actors started acting the parts of these lower caste demons and the lower caste people, folk as such, then they found themselves sympathizing, empathizing with these characters. And they became these characters when they acted those parts. Because this is what happens in theatre. And this is what Stanislavski had said, you see, which was where he was using the Aristotelian kind of a dogma for theatre, where he said, you see, that a kind of an empathy is created between the actor and the character in the doing and the performing of a role. And in this empathy and the sympathy that was created between the actor and the character, many of the upper caste actors, that is Bharat Muni's sons, they found that they were empathizing with the demons and the lower caste and the folk people whom they were representing in the story. Now this became a disturbance for the rigid upper caste sages and the upper caste Brahmins, you see, who held power at that time. And they decided that this is wrong. Look at these fellows. They belong to our caste, and yet in the plays that they are doing, they are sympathizing and empathizing with these villains. And not only are they sympathizing and empathizing with these villains, they are also ridiculing us as characters in their plays, because that was also there. That the upper caste characters like Indra was also ridiculed. You see, because there is a point, where Indra kills his human brother by using his lightning, and he kills his human brother from behind. It is an attack from the back, where the brother doesn't even know that he's being killed. And when the demon brother comes to know about it, he chases Indra across the three worlds. Now, the actor who is doing the part of the demon brother, right? When he chases Indra, there a very strange thing happens. And this is recorded by Girish Karnad in Agni Varsha. If you have seen the movie or if you have read the play, you will know this. That the actor who is doing the part of Indra's demon brother Vritta, he is supposed to wear the mask of the demon. And then he becomes the demon. When he wears the mask of the demon and becomes the demon, he really becomes the demon. And he chases the actor who is doing the part of Indra. And he chases this actor with blood in his eyes. He actually would have killed and murdered the actor who was doing the part of Indra. And the actor who is doing the part of Indra suddenly realizes that this is not acting anymore. This is real life, where he is being chased by another actor who might actually kill him, you see, in that play. And he runs for his life and the play gets disrupted. Now this happens in Agni Varsha, and this results, you see, where you see these upper caste actors, you see, who were doing the parts of the lower parts of demons and lower caste by empathizing with them. Now the sages decide that these upper caste actors should now be banished from the castes. They should now be made outcasts, because they did not deserve to be upper caste anymore. And they were ousted from their caste and cursed by the sages. The last chapter of Natya Shastra records this, that the sages curse these upper caste actors, Bharat Muni's sons, where Bharat Muni comes to the sages and prays to them, says that they should all be pardoned because they got carried away by their parts and they did all these things. This should not be taken so seriously, that they should be cursed to become outcasts. The reason why I took this example from the Natya Shastra and from Agni Varsha is just to make a point about an essential feature of theatre. In fact, a few essential features of theatre which remain to this day as part of theatre activity. And that is what I will develop on today. One, that theatre is a method by which you see knowledge that is a preserved thing for a certain class of people, a certain elitist category of people, comes down from that upper level down to the folk, the ordinary, the common man. Theatre is a means of that communication by which such a thing happened. That was the essential of the fifth Ved, because the fifth Ved was supposed to bring Vedic knowledge down to the level of the common people, from the upper caste elitist knowledge where it was the preserve for a long, long time. That it should not be the exclusive property of the upper caste, it should now become everybody's knowledge, and theatre was the means by which that Vedic knowledge would be communicated to the lower classes, the ordinary and the common people. This was one of the features of theatre. And the other was, you see, that this particular theatre would always have certain inherent problems because of these features. Because it would become a power struggle, because there was this political element in theatre. It was ingrained in theatre because of this. Right? There is some disturbance, right? I think from somewhere there is a disturbance that is coming, please.
Excuse me, sir.
Please unmute
Sir,
yourself.
please unmute yourself.
Please let me know. Oh, from when did you all not?
Sir, 2 minutes. Sir, 2 minutes. Sorry, sir, for 2 minutes.
Okay, for 2 minutes. Okay, right. Fine. So, I mean, I don't even know when I got, when I muted. Did I mute myself or somebody else?
No, sir. There's so much disturbance, sir, we had to mute them.
Oh, okay, you had to mute them. That is right. Sure. Fine. Thank you. Right. So here, what I would like to say is, you see, that now when we talk about, you see, this knowledge which was supposed to come from a certain level and be communicated at the lowest level, which is what theater would be, a medium of communication between that knowledge at the upper level and the common people, the folk. So let us come from the Natya Shastra and Agni Varsha, which creates the structure of this communication and the problems which were there in this communication. Let us come from that to certain ways in which this communication got formatted, you see, as we move through the ages of theater to, say, the contemporary experiments in theater. So here, let us begin with something like folk theater, right? Because folk theater, the reason why I'm taking up folk theater immediately after Natya Shastra and classical Sanskrit theater like Agni Varsha is that we are supposed to reach out to the folk. The folk have to participate in theater for theater to be meaningful. Otherwise, theater would remain an exclusive elitist activity, which was what it became and what the Natya Shastra talks of as one of the problems which were there with the original troupe, which is Bharat Muni and his sons, because they were elitists themselves, but they wanted to reach out to the folk. The Vedic knowledge had to reach out from that upper level to the folk. So here, it was very important that the folk have to be involved in theater. Folk theater, and here I will take just two examples initially, and then I will move on to political theater, where also I'll be taking some examples of folk theater. These two examples are, one, Hai Vadan by Girish, right? Now, you see, it was mentioned in the earlier kind of an introduction that around the 1970s, you see, post-independence, you see, there was a very strong movement, you see, where it was recognized that Indian theater, vernacular, regional, local Indian theater had to be promoted in India. And therefore, you see, there was an effort to do that. Now, when that was done, a lot of folk forms came into existence which people had forgotten, like the Yakshagan, the Tamasha, which was all mentioned, you see, and like the Jatra in Bengal. These are folk forms. Now, folk forms existed. They existed with the folk. I remember your Ananth Murthy once said that there are 1,620 languages. I think this was said by Balachandra Namade in India. And most of these languages, these 1,620 languages in India, were preserved by illiteracy. Not by literacy, but by illiteracy. Because the literate in our country only learned the elitist languages like Sanskrit, Persian, English, and the prominent languages. The dialects would have been forgotten if we had left it only to the literate. It is the illiterate who, through oral tradition, preserved so many languages in India. Similarly, folk theatre was preserved by the folk in the local regions in India, by the illiterate folk. But when this encouragement was done, you see, for Indian theatre, the local theatre becoming prominent again, you see, where the government took this initiative to encourage folk theatre. At that time, a lot of things happened in Indian theatre. And one of the initial experiments, which is known today as a very prominent experiment, is Girish Karnad's experiment with Hayavadan in the play Hayavadan. Now, in Hayavadan, remember that Karnad is using a story which is there in the Katha Sarit Sagar, which was originally the Brihat Katha. And in the Katha Sarit Sagar, there is the Vikram Vetal series of stories, you see, which many of you might have seen in Doordarshan when it was enacted, right? So he takes a story from there, from the Vikram Vetal series, which was later changed, transcreated by Thomas Mann into the transfigured heads, the changed heads. But Karnad goes back to the Katha Sarit Sagar, the Brihat Katha story, the Vikram Vetal story, and he uses that story, he brings it from that level of the Katha Sarit Sagar through the Yakshagan and the folk forms down to the level where people who have forgotten that story and the significance of that story will now suddenly understand what the significance of that story was in the psychological, sociological, political context. That is what Karnad does in Hayavadan. You see, that story in the Katha Sarit Sagar was a simple story, you see, of heads which got changed. And when the heads get changed, then the question arises as to what will now determine the identity of the person. When two people are there, one belongs to the upper caste, one belongs to the lower caste, one is a poet, a scholar, and the other is a laborer, then the heads get cut. You change the two heads, put the scholar's head on the laborer's body, put the laborer's head on the scholar's body. Now, who is the laborer and who is the scholar? The question of that identity arises. Is the laborer's body going to determine the identity, or is the laborer's head going to determine the identity? Is the scholar's body going to determine the identity, or is the scholar's head going to determine the identity? This was the question which came in a very broad general sense in Katha Sarit Sagar. Now, here in the Vikram Vetal story, which is the story that Vetal tells Vikram, and when Vikram is unable to give a satisfactory answer, the Vetal goes back to the tree to hang again there. Again, Vikram catches him. Again, he brings him. He's bringing him to a tantric who is waiting in the ghats, you see, to perform some kind of a ritual with the Vetal. And the Vetal doesn't know that will destroy him. So every time he is using this pretense of telling a story, and with a riddle that is there, a puzzle that is there in the end of the story, to confuse Vikram. And when Vikram gets confused, he disappears back again to that tree where he's hanging. Again, Vikram has to, and therefore there's a series of 25 stories, 25 times Vikram goes and brings him back to this place, and 25 times he escapes. Now that is the kind of a Shrinkhala narrative which was there in the Katha Sarit Sagar, which Karnad transcreates in Hayavadan in a modern psychological format, a sociological format, a political format, where for the first time this kind of a blending of certain stories which are there from a rich narrative past, you see, are brought into contemporary significance for people to understand. Wasn't this the original form of what the Natya Ved was trying to do? That you bring something from a certain level down to the level of the understanding of other people, so that that knowledge gets transferred through theatre, communicated through theatre to a wider, vaster audience. Right? So there you see, folk theatre enters. Garnet uses folk forms like the Yakshagana, the half curtain, puppet shows. He uses, you see, so many features of folk theatre. He uses masks in Hayavadan. Now, mask is used in folk theatre. He uses the narrator, the Bhagavat, who speaks directly to the audience. Now, remember, you see, somebody was talking about proscenium theatre, you see, what the Britishers taught us, you see, the stage, the proscenium theatre, you see, where you do George Bernard Shaw, you do Shakespeare and all that, you see, right? But you see, in folk theatre, there is a direct communication that is there between the Bhagavat, the narrator, and the audience. In Hayavadan, when the two heads are cut and interchanged, and when the interval happens, then Bhagavat addresses the audience and says, okay, interval, interval, interval. Now, please go and have your cup of tea. And while you have your cup of tea, try to come to a decision about who is who now. The one with the head or one with the body. Come back to the auditorium after having thought about it. Now, this is a direct communication with the audience, which was very much a part of our folk theatre tradition, which is where you see knowledge is being communicated from one level to the other level, right? From one level to the other level, right? Now, that is what is happening at that time. So here, this is part of that same structure, right, which is there. Remember that, right? The structure which was created by Natya Shastra, by the Natya Ved, the fifth Ved, right? Okay. So here, this is important that we remember that these experiments are very much a part of the fundamental structure of communication that is formatted and given in the Natya Shastra and which Agni Varsha had explored, right? So here, then you see, there was this complaint which was there about Girish Karnad being an urban dramatist. Now remember, you see, that you all are today urban people. I would say that you are not people, you see, who belong to the rural part of India. None of you. You are urban people. Now Girish Karnad, when he was doing Hayavadan, although he was using folk theatre, he was not doing it for the villagers of Karnataka. He was not doing it for them. He was doing it, as Karnad himself disclosed, he was doing it for the Dharwad audience. The Dharwad audience was a city audience. The city audience is different from the village audience. So there was this complaint that he was sort of using the exotic quality of folk forms like Yakshagan, masks, puppet show to kind of attract the city audience and try to sort of create that effect on the city audience. Whereas he should have been doing this theatre at the level of the folk, right there in the villages. Now this criticism of Girish Karnad becomes a very important criticism at one point of time, where somebody like Chandrasekhar Kambar, who was also from Karnataka, comes up with the other kind of a point that he makes. He says, Kambar says that he is a village person. He is a rural person. And he is not an urban person. And by the fact that he is a rural person, this fact is also there that the rituals which are performed in the rural part of Karnataka are part of his lifestyle, a part of his living day-to-day life. So in a play like Jokumar Swami, which is about a ritual, a fertility rite that is performed in rural Karnataka even today, which is called the Jokumara Hunnive. It is performed in rural Karnataka even today in the month of September. This is a fertility rite. A fertility rite is a rite and a ritual that is supposed to bring fertility back to the land. A land on which there is a curse of infertility. Remember, T.S. Eliot used fertility rites in The Wasteland. The fertility rites of Attis, Osiris, Adonis, you see. the ritual to romance of Jesse Weston, you see, where the Grail legend is used, where the resurrection of Christ is used as part of something that originated from the ancient pagan rites and rituals, the fertility rites. So here, Chandrasekhar Kambar is using similarly a fertility rite that is performed even today in rural Karnataka. That fertility rite is called Jokumara Hunnive, where a lauki is used as part of the fertility rite, which is a symbol of the male sexual symbol, right? It is a male sexual symbol, a phallic symbol, which is used and which is used for prayer. And Jokumara Swami is a local tribal god, the son of Lord Shiv and Ditna Devi, who is a tribal form of Parvati. I'm not going to go into that full story today because that is going to take a long time. But you see, Jokumara Swami is a fertility god, right? There's a story that is there, you see, where he seduces the women in the village because he has that tremendous kind of an attraction. And then the men actually kill him. And when his blood is spilt on the land, then the land becomes fertile again. And here you see a lauki is used as a symbol of Jokumar Swami, where after the prayer, the lauki is kind of used for cooking by women who have not conceived children. And when they serve that lauki to their husbands or the boyfriends or lovers or whatever, then the husband, the lover, and the boyfriend, they fall in love again with those women. And as a result, you see the women beget children. Fertility in the case of women, fertility in the case of land. Now, this is a tribal ritual. If we look at it from the modern feminist perspective, there can be a lot of criticism. I acknowledge that. But remember that this is a tribal ritual which is performed every year in September called the Jokumar Hunnive. And Chandrasekhar Kambar uses this fertility ritual in this play Jokumar Swami, where he modernizes that ritual. He modernizes it in a modern story where there's a feudal landlord who is very, very powerful in contemporary Karnataka, and he actually takes away the land of the village people because he's very powerful. He has his gundas, he's got his henchmen, and he takes away the land, and he takes away any woman that he desires in the village. Now these women, they go to him out of fear, not out of love. Right? But there is this farmer whose name is Basanna, whose land also has been taken away by this feudal agent, right? Whose name is Gauda. He has taken away the land of Basanna, but Basanna rebels against this feudal man. And this feudal man is afraid of Basanna also. But Basanna is a charming person, like the god Jokumar Swami, and the women go to him out of love. And this feudal landlord Gauda's wife Gaudati has also been married for many years, but she has not had a child because Gauda is more interested in the 1,000 other women whom he forcefully takes, but he neglects his wife. Now, after the Jokumar Hunnive, you see Gaudati, the wife of Gauda, he acquires a piece of that lauki and she makes a curry out of that, and she takes it for her husband Gauda so that he might fall in love with her again. But accidentally, that lauki goes to Basanna the farmer. And when Basanna eats it, he falls in love with Gaudati and they make love. And when the feudal lord comes to know of this, he comes with his men and he kills Basanna the farmer, slashes him into pieces like Jokumar Swami was killed, the god was killed. And when he dies, the blood of Basanna falls on the land, and then the land becomes fertile again. And more importantly, Gaudati conceives, and the child belongs to Basanna, not Gauda, the feudal landlord. So this ancient story is given a modern form, a contemporary form, by which you see its relevance at the symbolic level comes to the contemporary audience, especially the village audience who are looking at this play. Now, this is the difference between Havadan, which is for a Dharwad audience, and Jokumar Swami, which is for the village audience, because Chandrasekhar Kambar belongs to the village. But then Jokumar Swami is a play that would also appeal to the urban audience. They will also be able to understand it. Now, this is again part of that same structure of how stories, which belong to our ancient wisdom, like the story from Kathasarit Sagar in Havadan, and the story from Jokumar Swami, the Jokumar Hunnime ritual, how it is contemporized by theatre for a modern contemporary audience, where through this kind of an experimentation, it is brought to the contemporary theatre, where the same structure which was conceived in Natya Shastra, which was supposed to be the essence of the fifth Ved, where specific elitist knowledge of Vedas and the stories of the Vedas are communicated to the wider, vaster audience, the folk, the common people, the ordinary people. So that is continuing in these two examples that I took from folk theatre. The same kind of a thing happens in political theatre. Now here I will just give you one example. Here myth is not being used. Here history is being used. For example, let us take an example from somebody like Utpal Dutt, who uses the Jatra. Like Girish Garnet had used the Girish Garnet had used the Yakshagan, right? And Karnad and Kambar, Chandrasekhar Kambar was using also the folk form of Karnataka, right? So here you see, through these folk forms, it is reaching out to the common people. Similarly, Utpal Dutt uses the form of Jatra. And he does that in two plays, where I will very briefly talk about those two plays. One is the play called Mahavidro, which is based on the 1857 revolt, Sepoy Mutiny as it is called. And the other is a story from our ancient history, which is from the time of Samudragupta, where there was this Buddhist scientist called Kalhan, very much like Galileo, right? Who sort of discovers certain astronomical truths, you see, which he tried to sort of propagate. Now, you see, when we look at something like the Sepoy Mutiny, there are two ways in which the Sepoy Mutiny is looked at in history. One is the way in which the Britishers looked at the Sepoy Mutiny. The Sepoy Mutiny was seen by the Britishers as what is called the Sepoy Mutiny. It was a mutiny by the Sepoys. They did not take it to be anything more than that. They took it only as a mutiny by the Sepoys because they had to bite that cartridge which contained the grease, you see, which was going against the religious feeling of the Indian soldiers, right? Now, Indian historians did not call it the Sepoy Mutiny. They called it the First War of Independence, right? So there are these two interpretations of the 1857 revolt. One is the British interpretation, which calls it the Sepoy Mutiny, and one is the interpretation of Indian historians who would like to call it the First War of Independence. It is understandable that there can be these two interpretations. But Utpal Dutt does not interpret the Sepoy Mutiny as either a Sepoy Mutiny or as the First War of Independence. Neither of that. He interprets it from the perspective of Karl Marx, Das Kapital, where he says, you see, that the indigenous weavers of India, from the cottage industry that was there in India, you see, was destroyed by the Britishers because of their capitalist interests. They actually cut the thumbs of the weavers. We know that as part of history, so that they could not weave anymore. And then the cotton from India was exported to Britain, and from Lancashire, cotton garments came to India and they were sold in India. That is how the cottage industry, indigenous cottage industry, was destroyed by the Britishers. Now, what Utpal Dutt does through the Jatra form in a play like Mahavidro is he shows certain truths from history, where he shows you certain British officers who actually cut the thumbs of weavers, and then he shows how the sons and the grandsons of those weavers, they joined the Indian army and the mutineers in the Sepoy Mutiny, as it is called by the Britishers, and they become part of the rebellion against the Britishers, which gets integrated with the revolution, the Marxist revolution, which is where the entire thing gets interpreted from the point of view of Karl Marx. The reason I'm giving this example is that here, a form like Jatra is used by Utpal Dutt for a political purpose. Don't forget that when Utpal Dutt was doing these plays in the rural parts of Bengal, in Bengali, in the Jatra form, it appealed to the peasants and the workers who were watching these plays, you see, and it resulted in the Communist Party of India coming to power in Bengal so many years back. I'm not passing any judgment on whether it was the right thing or wrong, but this is what history tells us, that the Communist Party of India came into power, and then Utpal Dutt's theatre contributed to the Communist Party's coming into power, especially in the rural parts of Bengal, where theatre was used as a communication to transfer knowledge which was there at that high level, you see, Marxist knowledge, you see, the Das Kapital, which is the knowledge of intellectuals, that gets transferred through the medium of Jatra down to the folk. Very much like the same formula that Bharat Muni and his sons were doing, you see, transferring Vedic knowledge from the upper caste higher level to the folk, the common people, through the medium of the Natya Ved. So here you see that political theatre is also doing the same as I'm trying to show you through a play like Mahavidro. Right? Now here, I will skip the other one, you see, Kalhan's thing, because I don't think there is going to be enough time. Already maybe I'm running short of time, right? So here, what I would like to say is that you have somebody like, say, Badal Sarkar. His name was taken, you see. So I'm going to use the theatre of Badal Sarkar. Now, Badal Sarkar's first phase of theatre was Proscenium Theater, theatre of the stage, where you see, all of you are familiar with what a proscenium theatre is. Proscenium theatre is when you, which with what of you is the kind of theatre that all of you are used to. Is the theatre that uses the stage. Now the stage is an elevated space. Remember that. The audience is at a lower level. And when a play is done from the elevated space of the stage, you see, then the auditorium is in darkness. The auditorium is in darkness. And when the auditorium is in darkness, you remember that, you see, it is like somebody watching a cinema. From darkness, you're looking at a screen. You cannot interact with the actors there, you see. Like in folk theatre, there is an interaction between the actors and the audience. There is no interaction in proscenium stage. Because proscenium stage, the actors are lighted up on the stage, which is elevated, and the audience is in darkness in the auditorium. So a play like Evam Indrajit, which is the proscenium play of Badal Sarkar, is done on the stage from an elevated space, where the existential philosophy, which is part of what you read in Camus' myth of Sisyphus, that is kind of transcreated into the situation in Bengal, in modern Bengal. where Indrajit becomes a modern Sisyphus, where you see he is kind of like Sisyphus, leading a meaningless life. And it is the attitude that one has towards leading a meaningless life, which is what existential philosophy is all about, you see. If you know the myth of Sisyphus, Sisyphus rolls a boulder. You see, he's been cursed, he's been punished by the gods. Why? Because he defied the gods. He's punished by the gods. And what is the punishment? That he has to roll this boulder up the hill, take it to the top. And when it reaches the top, the boulder rolls down the other side of the hill. And then again, Sisyphus has to go down, again roll it up, and again it will go. And this is an endless act, a meaningless act. And this is what, from the existential perspective of Camus, existential philosophy and is all about, right? So here, this is what is happening. Remember that this Indrajit becomes like a modern Sisyphus, you see, in modern Bengal, and his existential problem becomes something that the audience watches from the darkness of the auditorium in the proscenium stage. But there is something which disturbs Father Sarkar. He feels, you see, that what is the meaning of this theater, you see, where there is such a gap between the actors and the audience, where it is like a gap which is there in cinema, right? Where the audience, Amitabh Bachchan is there on the screen, but can Amitabh Bachchan come out of the screen and become a part of the audience? He cannot, right? And the audience also cannot go and shake hands with Amitabh Bachchan. It's the same in theater, in proscenium theater, because the actor is in the stage, in the light, and the audience is in the darkness. Now here, there is this other hero, Prometheus, who is there, you see, in Badal Sarkar's mind also. Prometheus is also punished by the gods. But why is Prometheus different from Sisyphus? Prometheus is different from Sisyphus because Prometheus' problem is not an isolated problem of an individual person, which is enacted, you see, in his life. Prometheus's problem is different. He initially talks to the gods and tells them that the fire of knowledge which exists with the gods, the fire that he wants to take from the gods and he wants to give it to the humans so that they can use that fire. But the gods refuse. The gods refuse. They say, no, 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 no. This is our fire. You cannot take it there. So what does Prometheus do? He steals that fire from the gods and gives it to the humans. And when Prometheus steals the fire from the gods and gives it to the humans, gods punish Prometheus like they punish Sisyphus. But Prometheus's punishment is different. He is tied to a rock, right? He's in chains. And every day an eagle comes and eats his guts. But Prometheus bears it all. Like Sisyphus bears putting that rock, you see, with boulder that he takes to the top of the hill and it rolls down. That is Sisyphus' punishment. This is his punishment. And every day after the eagle has eaten and gone, the guts grow again. Every day. And therefore the gods get frustrated. Like the gods get frustrated with Sisyphus also, because Sisyphus keeps on carrying the boulder on the top of the hill, and again it rolls off, he again does it, and he doesn't complain. He says that if you have punished me, I am taking this punishment in defiance of your punishment. Let's see. And if I defy your punishment in this way, you cannot be happy giving me that punishment. Right? So this is my defiance. So here you see, Prometheus defies the gods like Sisyphus defies the god. But Prometheus' defiance of the gods is different. His defiance is in reaching the fire of knowledge to the humans, which the gods don't want him to do. So there has to be this communication between the person who is doing something and the audience. So what does Badal Sarkar's theatre do to change this relationship from the proscenium stage? He moves into what he calls the Angan Manch. And from the Angan Manch, he moves into the Mukta Manch, where all life is a stage. And as an actor, I am there in the midst of you. I am doing my part and I am carrying you with me in my acting. This is what he does in a play like Mitchell. Mitchell is, as all of you know, is procession. Zindabad, Murdabad, Murdabad, Murdabad. That is the Mitchell. Now here you see, there is this boy Khoka in Mitchell who is killed because he's a Naxalite by the police during the Naxalite revolution in Bengal. And he is already dead. And as a dead ghost, he comes in front of the audience and he says that I am Khoka, I was killed at this time and in this manner by the police. And this is what I was doing, this is what happening. And he's talking to the audience that this is what I wanted to do, but this is what happened. And then there's this old man who comes to him and says that you were a fool. And because of that, you died. And there's a conversation between the old man and Khoka. And as that conversation gets more and more intricate, then they say, let us now move into rebellion against what the police did. And Khoka and the old man, they lead a Mitchell of actors. But that Mitchell of actors, you see, does not stay in a proscenium stage. They are at the same level as the audience. And the way the seats are arranged by Badal Sarkar for the audience are that there is pathway between the 2 rows of seats or 3 rows of seats, so that the procession moves between the audience and it picks up the audience and the audience becomes a part of that Mitchell. Again, the same formula of Natya Shastra. That bring knowledge from there to the level of the common people through the medium of theatre, so that you can involve the folk at that level of communication and make it one. Now these are all parts of theatrical experiments which were being done at a certain point of time in India as part of what are contemporary experiments in Indian theatre. And they follow the fundamental structure that was given in the Natya Shastra of the 5th Ved and the conception of the 5th Ved, where 5th Ved was supposed to be this. And always there are problems that people in theatre have faced. The same kind of problems that was faced by the actors in Bharat Muni's troupe. The problems that they faced from the demons and the problems that they faced from the upper caste, from the sages who made them outcasts. The same problems are faced by directors, the same problems are faced by actors. Now, in case you think that I'm talking through my hat, that these problems are not faced, let me end my talk with another experimental play. And this is my last example. This is a play by Safdar Hashmi. All of you must have heard about this play. It was a play called Halla Bol. It was staged in Sahibabad, close to Delhi, many years back. And what was the play about? It was the rebellion, the kind of a revolt of factory workers against the capitalist owners, which is typical of street theatre. Nukkad Natak, you see political theatre done on the streets. Now at that time, when Hashmi did this play in Sahibabad, you know what happened. Gundas, political gundas from a party, they came, they disrupted the performance, and Safdar Hashmi was killed. He was killed. He was not made an outcast. He was killed. He was finished. Now, theatre always faces such problems from all levels. Theatre has survived despite all these problems and has survived to overcome these problems so that, theatre is relevant, means of communication even today, you see, between certain levels of knowledge and the ordinary masses, the common people. That is the most relevant part of experimental theatre, communicative theatre, contemporary theatre in India. And that is where, I mean, I wish I could expound much more on this. This can go on and on, but I know that I have spoken for a longish time, and I also have to take my leave because I have to go to the university. I'm doing this from home, right? So if any of you would like to sort of talk about all these things, like to ask certain things, it's open to the house now. Please. Thank you. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Right.
It was immense nostalgia being back in class after about 35 long years.
Right.
But it was really wonderful, sir. And theatre can never die.
Yes.
Theatre is part of our life. We too are facing the same things. We also have to come down from the upper level to the lower level, especially when we are teaching. We may be living in an urban city, but our students are all rural.
Absolutely, you're right. This is a very valid point. We are constantly doing this. We are performers ourselves.
Yes, sir. Right? We are performing. We have to come down constantly to that level, to reach out to them, to make them understand all these nuances that are there in literature.
Right.
And sir, on this platform, I thank you and my other professors for having given me that opportunity of learning from you, which I still continue. And it has been an immense pleasure having you here amongst us. And I'm so proud that I can share you and your knowledge with my colleagues, with my students, with all the other participants. It's been an immense pleasure. I would call upon Pragya Pandey to now give the vote of thanks. Pragya, please unmute yourself. Pragya. She can't hear me. Perhaps I've sent somebody over.
Right.
But it was sheer.
Good afternoon.
Right, I think.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we have reached the end of this beautiful function today. I, Pragya Pandey, take the opportunity to put my gratitude into words. First of all, I would like to thank Almighty God for making today's function a great success. On behalf of the Department of English, Government Girls PG College, Riva, I would like to extend my heartiest thanks for Honorable Mr. Chandra Dr Roy for his presence in the function. Thank you, sir, for enlightening us with your knowledge and so many interesting things. He gave deep insight into the topic and also revealed some interesting facts. The point where Mr. Roy told us about the theatre in the strongest medium for spreading knowledge for upper caste to ordinary folk was really very informative. I am pretty sure the precious knowledge that Mr. Roy gave us will definitely help us in our future. You are an exemplary person and we have a lot to learn from you. We are all inspired by your deep knowledge. Thank you, sir. I express my deep sense of appreciation for an amazing Saraswati Vandana rendered by Mrs. Rini Basu Sinha. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your gracious and lovely cooperation in this webinar. I wholeheartedly thank our principal, Professor Neeta Singh, for her support and guidance in organizing the webinar. Thank you, ma'am, for encouraging all of us. We have been fortunate enough to get the support of the teacher of the college for making this function successful. I show my gratitude to our head, Dr. Anita Kaushal, for her vibrant effort in making this webinar possible. And I express my sincere thanks to Dr. Sepoy Mutiny for an excellent anchoring. A special thanks to the teaching and non-teaching staff for their unflinching support and coordination. My heartfelt thanks to our all students. With these warm words, we move to the end of the today's webinar. Thank you everyone for being with us. Happy Women's Day to all the incredible women. Shine on, not just today, but every day. Have a nice day to all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you.
Right.
Thank
Let
you,
me also
sir.
extend
Thank you,
my heartfelt feelings, you see, on Women's Day, because this is a women's college and I can see a lot of women there on the screen, right?
Thank you so
That
much, sir.
is been a pleasure and a privilege, as I said earlier also, to be here with all of you and to speak to you about theater. The only problem is, you see, that much of this, needs far greater expounding, you see, which is not possible in a single talk, right? I mean,
Sir,
usually,
sir, we would like to invite you yet again.
We
right.
wish to see you
This
again
needs
and
a
again.
lot of expounding, you see, because each play that I tried to sort of put it in a nutshell, but then you see, I realized that might not be making the points very clear, which would require separate kind of analysis, every time. But anyway, it was a pleasure to share it all with all of you, right? Absolutely. Thank you.
It's our pleasure, sir, to have you here, sir. It was a wonderful session. Thank you so much for sharing such a nice and insightful knowledge with us. Thank you so much, sir. And we wish to see you again, sir.
Certainly. I mean, I hope, you see, the times will come when I'll be able to visit you in Rewa.
Yes,
Because
sir.
Rewa is
Yes,
one place,
sir.
you see, where,
Sure, sir.
where we
Yes, sir.
keep on going, because it's en route Bandhavgarh. We keep on going,
Oh.
we do visit
Yes,
Bandhavgarh
yes.
a lot, And
Yes, sir.
Rewa is the
Yes,
place
yes.
that from which
Sure,
we
sir.
go there, right?
Sure, sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you once
Right.
more. Have a good
Okay.
day.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
I forgot to say, if anybody wants to ask something, they can, please. I mean, if you feel, or you can text the this thing, I can give an answer there.
So we have another session with Vice Principal
Fine,
here, sir.
fine. Okay. Righto. I'm leaving then. Right.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All the best.
Thank you so much, sir.